Welcome, dear literature enthusiasts, to a space where film and text entwine, where frames become stanzas and stories unfold like epic poems. It's wonderful to have you here on Frame Shift, our cozy corner for intellectual wanderings through cinema, S. Louvre. If you ever feel moved by thoughtful dissections and heartfelt musings, please consider liking and subscribing. Your support helps this exploration flourish. Before we embark on our journey, a gentle reminder that what follows isn't a conventional review, but rather a deeply intellectual, theoretical, and critical analysis tailored for those with a literature background. Think of it as a seminar in narrative architecture, a workshop in mythic resonance. I still remember the first time I encountered its sweeping vistas, the peaks of ancient ruins rising like the ambitions of heroes I'd once read about in dusty tomes. That feeling of awe of myth coming alive lingered long after I turned off the screen. It resonated with the afternoons I spent tracing the arcs of Beowulf's heroism in high school, the evenings I lost myself in Homer's rolling couplets, dreaming of gods who meddled in mortal affairs. Watching its storm-lashed shores and chariot races, I felt those same echoes of classical lore, that same thrill of witnessing archetypes spill onto celluloid. It felt personal, as if the film had plucked a page from my own reading logs and breathed color into words I thought existed only in black ink. In this opening stretch, I invite you to settle in as if you're curled up on my living room sofa, leaning in over mugs of jasmine tea. I'll share why this film, for all its Hollywood polish, connects to something primal in me, an affection for the old stories that shaped our myths, an obsession with the cracks between fate and free will. As I guide you through its world, I hope you'll find points of resonance in your own academic journeys, those moments when a line of dialogue or a silken ribbon of melody made you feel less alone in your passions. At its core, this story waves the banner of legend retold. It takes us to a realm where gods walk among mortals, where thunderclaps are not mere weather but the breath of celestial masters. Here, a demigod torn between two worlds must embrace his heritage, not only to save a kingdom, but to redefine what heroism truly means. Through the film's robust visuals and throbbing score, an ancient conflict resurfaces, reminding us that the scars of divine caprice often mark human lives in ways far more searing than any blade. As the camera sweeps across the salt-stung waves and plunges into labyrinthine temples, I'm struck by the way the cinematography becomes a poem in motion. Long tracking shots unfurl like lines of iambic pentameter, guiding our gaze from horizon to horizon. The editing chops rhythm into crescendos that mimic an epic's rising action, and over it all, the sound design murmurs with whispers of cyclopean hearts and winged horses in flight. In this panorama, the film doesn't just retell a myth. It reimagines it, sculpting the familiar into new forms while retaining the weight of antiquity. Yet beyond spectacle, there's a quieter undercurrent. The film grapples with legacy, with questions of lineage that resonate deeply in any discussion of literary inheritance. Our protagonist stands at the threshold of identity, torn between his mortal upbringing and the pull of his divine parentage. This internal tug-of-war mirrors the struggles of every reader who has felt the gravity of a text's influence, weighed down by the canon, even as we crave the freedom to interpret. It's a tension I know well. My heart has always shifted between reverence for the classics and an itch to carve new meanings from their bones. When the plot unveils itself, it does so in jolts of urgent conflict. The mortal realm teeters on the brink of annihilation, besieged by forces that mock the natural order. Out of the celestial heights descends a prophecy, pulsing with ominous promise. Our hero must assemble alliances, some earthly, some otherworldly, and navigate betrayals that sting like salt on open wounds. Along the way, he discovers that true power often hides in vulnerability, that compassion can be fiercer than vengeance. In these moments of revelation, the film flirts with Shakespearean tragedy, echoing those hushed utterances before a fatal misstep. I won't dwell on every battle or each flourish of CGI, though the spectacle dazzles. Instead, let me tease a few critical pivots. There's a sequence in a torchlit basilica where loyalties fracture beneath flickering shadows, a scene that reminded me of Lear's descent into madness as much as it did of any action blockbuster. There's a whispered confrontation atop a breakneck cliff, where the wind whips confessions and curses alike, echoing the stormy speeches of Greek choruses. And in an unexpected twist, the film asks us to reconsider the nature of sacrifice, who gives up what, and at what cost to the self and the collective. These thematic ripples are what truly drew me in. I found myself pausing to reflect on the nature of hubris, remembering essays I'd penned on tragic heroism and the delicate balance between pride and downfall. I thought about how, in my own life, I've navigated the tension between ambition and humility, between reaching for greatness and remaining grounded. That personal mirror is precisely why this theoretical examination matters. It bridges the screen to the psyche, the ancient verse to modern reflection, the world-building teams with classical illusions that reward a literate eye. Architectural marvels rise like Pindaric odes. Dialogues slip into rhythms that hint at iambs beneath the veneer of contemporary speech. The costuming whispers of togas and tunics, of war-visored helmets whose crests gleam like epiphanies. In these details, the film crafts a tapestry that beckons the viewer to read between the lines, to trace the genealogy of each motif back to Hesiod's verses or the sculptures of Phidias. It cultivates an interplay between visual poetry and textual heritage. Yet, even as we revel in mythic grandeur, the film never loses sight of its characters, emotional cores. Our demigod wrestles not only with monsters conjured by divine wrath, but with doubts that plague his dreams. He wonders if he's deserving of love, if his choices are his own or merely echoes of prophecies long spoken. These questions, in turn, echoed my own late-night musings about free will, about whether we write our destinies or merely recite the lines handed down to us by our forebears. As the narrative surges toward its climax, a cascade of revelations upends our assumptions. Allies once steadfast reveal hidden agendas, villains display unexpected dimensions. In one moment of tragic grace, a betrayal stings more sharply because it emerges from someone we believed invincible. It's a reminder that even in stories steeped in divine intervention, the sharpest poignancy often arises from human frailty. To tease just one of these major turns, when the gates to the underworld yawn open, the film shifts gears from heroic bravado to introspective sorrow. In that shadowed realm, the hero confronts not only a literal monster, but the specters of his own doubts. It's a quiet interlude amidst the chaos, a pause that reverberates like an elegy. And in that echo, I felt the pull of elegiac poetry, that tender ache for what has been lost, whether it be a loved one or the innocence of unknowing. Folks, such moments are where cinema transcends mere entertainment, where it taps into the same currents that carry our favorite novels and poems. This film, our subject of exploration, invites us to sit in the intersection between visual wonder and intellectual discourse, to wander those halls where narrative theory and mythology coalesce. It's not flawless. There are stumbles in pacing and occasional swells of melodrama that felt too keenly calibrated. Yet those very imperfections remind me of the malleability of myth, how each retelling shapes itself to its time, bearing the marks of its creator's ambitions and anxieties. I hope this introduction stirs your curiosity, awakens memories of your own encounters with classical texts, and prepares you for a journey that will be equal parts spectacle and scholarship. Together, we will unravel its symbolism, question its narrative choices, and reflect on what it reveals about our enduring fascination with gods and heroes. Thank you for joining me, for bringing your literary minds and empathetic hearts into this shared conversation. Let's dive in and discover what lies beneath the veneer of legend and blockbuster spectacle. The morning light spilled across the rugged coastline as our hero stirred, the air thick with salt and possibility. He awoke in a simple fisher's hut, the scent of brine mingling with wood smoke, and for a moment he wondered if the world hadn't been swept away by some fevered dream. Yet the weight of dripping canvas and the soft scrape of leather at his side reminded him that this journey was no illusion. Slowly, he rose from the rough-hewn bed, muscles aching from labors unremembered, and stepped into the dim corridor, guided only by a flicker of torchlight. In that moment, I felt his uncertainty as keenly as my own on first reading Beowulf's hesitant stride into Hiorat's hall. It was a pause pregnant with destiny, the quiet before the storm of myth. Outside, the sea thrummed against the rocks, each wave a hushed omen of greater tides to come. He moved toward the shore, where boats lay tethered like resting beasts, their sails furled against the dawn. It was here that he encountered an old fisherman, weathered and bent, who offered a knowing nod instead of words. The old man's eyes gleamed with recognition, as if he had once seen the boy cradled in the arms of a god. In my mind, I heard the echo of ancient storytellers, the bards who whispered prophecies into eager ears, prophecies of bloodlines shaken loose and worlds suspended at the whim of deities. The fisherman's silent blessing felt like a prayer carried by gulls across the water, a promise that this young man's fate would not be his alone. When he boarded the skiff, each plank creaked beneath his weight, like the cracking spine of some slumbering titan. He gripped the oars and pushed into the swell, his breath steady, his heart a drumbeat in his chest. As the shoreline receded, memories surfaced, glimpses of a childhood spent on dusty steps in a temple courtyard, learning the sacred texts inscribed in stone. He recalled the hush of candlelit evenings, where priests chanted of worlds beyond mortal ken, weaving tales of gods who tested men and monsters, who devoured flesh and spirit alike. With each stroke he felt those lessons stir within him, a quiet urgency to prove himself worthy of the legends he had only ever read. The sea opened its arms, and our hero's thoughts drifted to his mother's laughter, ringing bright as bells. She had soothed him through nightmares of creeping shadows, teaching him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the resolve to stand against it. He remembered how her fingers had traced patterns in the sand, shaping symbols that spoke of protection and fate. Her voice, soft yet unwavering, had whispered that he was marked by something greater, that the blood in his veins carried both mortal warmth and the chill of the divine. Now, alone upon the rolling waves, he felt those dualities war within him. The desire for a simple life and the inexorable pull toward the unknown. By midday, he sighted land crowned with towers of sandstone, their ramparts jutting like the spines of ancient beasts. This was the city of men, where power whispered through marble columns and bronze statues glinted in sunlight. As he rode into the harbor, the hustle of the marketplace reached him. The clinking of coins, the bartering cries, the bark of guards patrolling stone-paved streets. He disembarked amid a swirl of curious glances, merchants eyeing his weathered garb, children pausing their games to stare at the foreign stranger. He felt like a page torn from a larger manuscript, one whose margins held secrets yet to be written. He made his way through winding alleys, guided by a fervent pulse in his chest. Word had passed that the king sought an audience with a figure of unusual heritage, though the rumors were as slippery as the fish in barrels at the docks. At the palace gates, he paused, taking in the weight of the colossal doors carved with images of warfare and devotion. Guards in gleaming armor barred his path, eyes narrowed like hawks sizing up prey. He clasped his cloak tighter, remembering his mother's final admonition to stand tall and speak truth. Summoning every ounce of steadiness, he presented himself at the threshold, and the gates swung open with a resonant creak, as if acknowledging a long-awaited chapter. Inside, the throne room yawned wide, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Tapestries depicting heroic conquests lined the walls, their threads shimmering with stories of gods and men entwined in passion and conflict. At the far end sat the king, robed in crimson silk, his gaze sharp as obsidian. He gestured for the youth to approach, and each step echoed like a verse in a dirge. The king's voice, when it came, was measured yet laced with urgency. He spoke of growing unrest at the borders, of whispers that the immortal pantheon had grown restless, of omens carved in the stars. He implored the stranger to lend his strength, to stand as a bulwark against forces that threatened mortal realms. In that moment, I felt the weight of inherited destiny, a sensation I've known when turning the pages of tragedy's great epics. The youth's shoulders squared, and he found words he didn't know he possessed, a pledge to protect, to confront the shadows gathering at the edges of their world. The court held its breath as he spoke, and in his tone echoed the mortal resolve that once buoyed Achilles as he strode toward the Trojan gates. The king accepted the vow, and with a flourish of silk and steel, the audience ended. Our hero exited into shafts of sunlight, his mind aflame with questions. What price would he pay for this promise? Would history remember him as a savior or a cautionary tale? As he journeyed back to the outskirts, word spread like wildfire through the city's arteries. Faces turned at his approach, some filled with hope, others with trepidation. Mothers clutched children closer, scholars peered at him through their scrolls, warriors touched the hilts of their swords. In the echo of their gazes, he sensed a tapestry of expectations woven from fear and faith. He paused by a fountain carved in the likeness of a sea serpent coiled around a pearl, its polished stone glinting as water danced over its scales. There, he considered his path. The life he'd led, simple and unadorned, and the vast new role he must now inhabit. Night fell around the city like a velvet cloak, and he found himself drawn to the temple of the gods, an edifice of white marble bathed in torchlight. The air inside was heavy with incense, the flicker of votive candles casting trembling patterns on reliefs of divine forms. He knelt before an altar carved with runes older than any living memory, the scent of myrrh balm to his frayed nerves. In the hush, he laid his palm upon the stone and closed his eyes, seeking counsel in the silence. And though no voice answered him, he felt a warmth spread through his chest, as if a gentle hand rested against his heart, reminding him that he walked in both worlds. The next dawn found him at the city's gate, preparing to depart for the wilds where rumors spoke of monsters awakened by celestial wrath. He gathered provisions, bread dense with grain, dried figs sweet as memories, a waterskin etched with the crest of his mortal line. He strapped a bronze sword to his side, its edge keen enough to carve through doubt itself. As he set out, I sensed in him the same mixture of trepidation and exhilaration that once compelled me to trek into the woods that inspired the Fairy Queen, where each rustle of leaves hinted at enchantment or peril. His path led through pastures stitched with daisies, where shepherds tended their flocks beneath sky-swept hills. He paused to help a farmer repair a broken cartwheel, his strong hands learned in the humblest of tasks. In return, the farmer spoke of strange lights flickering on the horizon at night, of sheep missing from their pens, of tremors that shook the earth beneath grazing hooves. It felt like a page torn from a Gothic romance, where the uncanny creeps into ordinary scenes. Our hero listened with the patience of a scholar parsing an obscure text, storing each detail like a line in a marginalia. Beyond the farmlands lay forests dense as midnight, where ancient oaks rose like silent sentinels. The air here was damp and cool, the canopy weaving a mosaic of light and shadow. Branches whispered in a language only the wind understood, and every snap of twig beneath his boots seemed magnified in the hush. He pressed onward, senses alert for the flicker of movement, perhaps a deer leaping through the brush, or something far more fearsome, its eyes glinting with malice. I remembered my first night camped beneath cathedral pines, the thin veil of civilization slipping away until only primal instincts remained. As dusk descended, he reached a clearing strewn with ruins, cracked pillars, moss-covered statues whose features had been eroded by centuries of rain. In the heart of that shattered sanctuary stood an altar stained dark with old blood. This was the locus of portent, the spot where the veil between worlds thinned. Gathering courage, he approached, each footfall echoing like a question thrown into a cosmic void. He knelt again, running fingers along glyphs that pulsed with latent power. A chill wind rose, stirring his cloak like an unseen breath, and for a heartbeat, the air crackled with tension. Then the wind stilled, and he rose, resolute, having gleaned nothing more than the hush of silence. Night's cloak deepened, and he made camp among overturned stones. Flames danced in a makeshift hearth, and as he ate his meager supper, he contemplated the fragility of mortal defenses. What lay ahead, titans of old, roused by ancient grudges, creatures birthed by the gods' resentments, or perhaps his own doubts, manifesting as specters in the darkness. I felt his internal struggle, that blend of scholarly inquiry and visceral dread, echoing my own forays into uncanny archives where knowledge can unmoor the mind. Morning light, a pale promise, beckoned him onward. He broke camp, gathered his gear, and followed a path carved by hoofprints and claw marks. At a bend in a mist-shrouded ravine, he encountered a patrol of royal knights, their armor dented, their standards torn. They spoke in hushed tones of ambushes, of men taken by unseen hands, of comrades lost to ravines that seemed to swallow whole platoons. Despite their fear, their eyes held a spark of defiance, a faith in something greater than steel. He shared bread with them, offered words of reassurance drawn from the texts he'd studied, reminding them that courage is found in the smallest acts of hope. Together, they ventured deeper into the ravine, where the mist clung to rocks like ghosts unwilling to depart. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very air conspired to anchor them in place. From the canyon walls, faint howls echoed, the source unseen but ever present. Our hero's hand never strayed far from his sword's hilt, and I felt the tension coil in his chest, mirroring the tightness I've known when paging through a suspenseful manuscript. Yet even here in the jaws of uncertainty, he remained a beacon of calm, his mind cataloging each clue like a librarian indexing forbidden volumes. As they neared the ravine's nadir, the knights halted abruptly. A massive form lay sprawled across the path, its scale-like armor shimmering in the gray light. A creature half fish, half human, its eyes wide with a feral intelligence, raised a blood-stained trident in challenge. The knights tensed, swords drawn, but our hero stepped forward, voice steady as mortar, reciting an invocation learned in secret lore. The creature paused, its brow furrowing in confusion at the cadence of ancient words. In that instant, the balance between violence and understanding wavered. I recalled the moment in Ovid where words temper chaos, reminding us that language can hold sway over even the most primal of forces. The beast snarled, then lunged, and steel rang against bone as knights met it in a furious clash. Our hero circled wide, watching the creature's movements, noting its vulnerabilities, a break in its armored fin, a hesitance in its swing. As the battle raged, he seized a moment of clarity, charging forward to drive his sword beneath the beast's resilient hide. The trident clattered aside, and with a final roar, the creature collapsed, its life ebbing in ripples that stained the stones. Silently he knelt beside it, offering a wordless apology for the necessity of violence, a gesture that carried the weight of compassion amid carnage. By the time the sun dipped low, they emerged from the ravine onto a broad plateau where the pillars of an ancient temple jutted into the sky. Their outlines were jagged, as though storms had sculpted them into broken sentinels. Here, the air shimmered with lingering magic, and an archway carved with celestial symbols beckoned. The knights formed a circle around our hero, their faces etched with exhaustion and awe. They looked to him not just as a warrior, but as a guide through realms where mortal and divine converged. As he crossed the threshold, I sensed that we, too, stood at the cusp of revelation. The air thrummed with possibility, echoing the pulse of a narrative on the brink of transformation. It was here that the plot, like a river gaining force, would surge toward confrontations untold, alliances forged in fire, and truths too immense for ordinary minds. In that charged silence, I felt the same reverence I first experienced holding the Aeneid in trembling hands, knowing that within these fragments of stone, within this crucible of myth, lay the heartbeat of stories that define us. And so, with breath caught between wonder and resolve, our hero prepared to step into the depths of legend, unaware that his greatest trials and his deepest discoveries awaited just beyond the sunrise. The sun hung low in a bruised sky as the hero pressed onward, haunted by the echoes of his fallen quarry. In that moment, I recalled my first glimpse of the film Clash of the Titans, when the clash between mortal ambition and divine jealousy first crackled across the screen. Now, as he stepped through the shattered archway of the ancient temple, light and shadow danced like twin specters, each whispering secrets of what must come next. The air thrummed with an electric promise, as though the stones themselves remembered the god's footsteps and trembled in anticipation of the revelations yet to unfold. His eyes adjusted to the dim glow within, and he beheld a vast chamber carved into the living rock, its walls inscribed with scenes of primordial power. Serpents coiled around celestial spheres, heroes battled winged beasts, and in the center, a fractured mosaic hinted at a treasure lost to time. The hero's breath caught. This was the heart of the world's memory, the heart of myth itself. He moved forward, each footfall resonating like a drumbeat in a procession of fates, and I felt the tide of tension swell in my own chest, as if my pulse were bound to the fate of that chamber. It was here that the second movement of this symphony would begin, notes twisting into unexpected harmonies and dissonances. At the far end of the hall, a dais lay strewn with relics. A shattered lightning bolt, fragments of a winged helm, and a coiled chain that glowed with faint blue radiance. He knelt to examine the chain, recalling legends that spoke of shackles forged to bind the underworld's mightiest terrors. As his fingers brushed the metal, a jolt of energy coursed through him, visions flared, a sea of souls reaching skyward, a titan silhouette casting a pall over a once-proud city, and the flash of ruin's talons poised to crush all hope beneath their iron gaze. He stumbled back, wrenching air into his lungs, but the visions persisted, urging him onward. In that crucible of prophecy, I felt the gleam of inevitability. The path he walked was neither straight nor safe, but woven through the tapestry of fates he could not yet comprehend. He rose, determination etched on his brow, and called to the heavens. His voice echoed through the chamber, demanding truth from forces unseen. For a moment, silence answered, heavy, expectant. Then came a rumble, not of earth or stone, but of discontented gods. Pillars cracked overhead, dust raining like phantom tears, and the chamber's entrance slammed shut as if willed by divine hand. He drew his sword, its blade catching the flicker of torchlight, and pressed his back against the cold wall, braced for the trial that had been set before him. In that pause, I remembered my own heart pounding in a darkened theater, the scent of popcorn mingling with anticipation, and the pure, thrilling dread of what lay beyond the next cut. From the shadows emerged a figure draped in ebony robes, its face obscured beneath a hood of night. The hero recognized the gait, the languid confidence. It was the god whose wrath had set these events in motion. Stepping into the torchlight, the deity's eyes gleamed like dying stars, and his voice dropped to a whisper that shook the stones. He taunted the hero, weaving words that cut like razors. Reminders of mortal frailty, of debts unpaid, of divine vendettas that brooked no forgiveness. The hero's jaw clenched as he hung on each syllable, his knuckles whitening on the hilt of his sword. It was a moment of reckoning, not of arms but of wills, and I felt a chill sweep across the narrative. This was not a mere battle of steel, but a gauntlet thrown before the soul. With a roar, the hero lunged forward, blade raised high. The god met him with ethereal shields of swirling mist, deflecting each strike as if playfully batting away a child's toy. They danced across the chamber, strikes and parries etched in firelight, a duel straddling the line between mortal grit and divine omnipotence. Sparks erupted with each clash, illuminating the mosaics above in fleeting brilliance. And yet, for every blow the hero landed, he felt the invisible weight of godly power pressing down, a reminder that destiny was a thread spun beyond mortal hands. As I watched, I sensed the rhythm of this confrontation mirrored the great poetic duels of old, Achilles and Hector, Gilgamesh and Enkidu, where the clash itself bore the weight of worlds. At last the god retreated, voice echoing with mock regret as he vanished into a swirl of shadows, leaving the hero panting amid fallen relics. The chamber trembled once more, and a fissure split the floor, swallowing the broken dais in a rush of dust. The hero backed away, heart pounding, as the ground beneath him gave way. He plunged into darkness, tumbling through a cascade of rubble until he landed with a bone-jarring thud on a lower level, the air smoky and thick. Pulling himself to his feet, he blinked against the gloom and found himself in a cavern lit by phosphorescent fungi, their pale light casting surreal shadows on walls slick with moisture. He pressed onward through narrow tunnels, guided by the distant clang of waves. The scent of salt grew stronger, and at last he emerged onto a vast subterranean beach. Moonlight filtered through cracks above, revealing a sea as black as obsidian. In the center of this cavern lay a colossal creature, its coils entwined around a massive pillar of rock. It was the Kraken, an ancient horror summoned by divine decree. Its eyes, vast and luminescent, fixed upon him as if measuring the depth of his soul. I felt my breath hitch. I remembered the first time I saw that Leviathan looming on screen, my heart slamming against my ribs as I recognized the embodiment of primal fear. He approached with measured steps, mindful of each ripple of the water at his boots. Recalling the lore he had studied, he knew that the beast's power was tethered to a single bond, the chain he had touched earlier. He reached beneath his cloak and retrieved the glowing chain, its links humming with latent energy. The Kraken's eye stalks quivered as it sensed the chain's presence, and it let out a roar that shook the cavern's roof, sending shards of stone raining like deadly hail. The hero's resolve did not waver. He flung the chain toward the beast, aiming for the anchor point that secured it. The chain's blue glow cut through the darkness as it spun, striking the pillar with a crack like thunder. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like the world groaning in defiance, the chain drew taut, and arcs of lightning crackled along its length. The Kraken reeled, thrashing its claws against the chains that bound it, bellowing rage and pain. The hero leaped aside as water cascaded off the creature's scaled hide, each drop flickering like molten silver. He rolled to his feet and sprinted toward the cavern's edge, chanting the incantation that would shatter the chains. His voice grew stronger with each word, resonant as the bellows of a chorus calling the doomed to reckoning. And in that moment I felt the convergence of scholarship and spectacle. Words, mere words, wielding the force to tame an otherworldly horror. The chain snapped with a blinding flare of light, and the Kraken let out a final, ear-splitting shriek before collapsing into the dark waters. The cavern shuddered, and a geyser of brine exploded from the sea, dousing the hero in a shower of salt and spray. He staggered but remained upright, heart hammering in triumph and relief. The darkness receded, replaced by the gentle shimmer of dawn breaking through the cracks above. As he gazed upon the fallen Titan, he realized that this victory carried a weight beyond the physical, the knowledge that courage and compassion could shape the paths of gods and monsters alike. Climbing back into the upper chamber, he found the temple's entrance unsealed, the sunlight bathing the ancient mosaics in forgiving warmth. He stepped into the courtyard, where a figure waited. The princess whose fate had been bound to the beast's terror. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of awe and gratitude, met his, and in that glance passed the unspoken acknowledgement of shared trauma and salvation. I remembered how in the narratives I studied, such moments often hinted at new beginnings, a promise that out of darkness, a fragile hope might bloom. Together, they journeyed back toward the city, the princess leaning on his arm as they walked along the road lined with statues of forgotten heroes. Townsfolk emerged from their homes, blinking at the sight of the hero leading the princess through the dawn light. There were tears of joy, shouts of praise, and the bittersweet recognition of lives changed forever. Children pressed forward to place laurel wreaths at his feet, and elders bowed in reverence. In that procession, I saw the echo of celebratory odes penned by ancient scribes, how communities gather to witness the moment when myth and reality collide, forging legends in living flesh. At the palace gates the king awaited, his face a canvas of relief and respect. The hero presented the princess safely by his side, and as the king embraced her, his eyes flicked to the hero, gratitude shining like molten gold. With solemn gestures, the prince knelt before the hero, offering the keys of the kingdom and pledging eternal friendship. But the hero, mindful of his mother's teachings and the cost of power, rose and refused. He spoke of home, of simple joys, and of a life unencumbered by thrones and crowns. His voice was calm, infused with the conviction that freedom, true freedom, lay not in dominion over others but in the sovereignty of the soul. The king's eyes glistened with understanding. He placed a hand on the hero's shoulder and whispered words that resonated deeper than any decree. "You are always welcome here, friend." The courtyard erupted in cheers, banners snapping in the breeze, and for a moment the world tasted of promise and peace. Yet amidst the celebration, I sensed a subtle shift, the knowledge that the hero's journey was neither beginning nor end, but a single stride in an endless quest for meaning. As twilight fell, the hero and the princess walked to the harbor, where a lone skiff awaited. She bid him farewell with a touch to his hand, her eyes reflecting the pale glow of lanterns. He offered a small smile, a gesture of gratitude for shared trials and triumphs. Then he pushed away from the dock, oars dipping into glassy water, each stroke carrying him farther from the shores of legend and closer to the embrace of the everyday world. The princess watched until he became a shadow on the horizon, her silhouette framed by the lantern light, a living testament to the bonds forged in the crucible of myth. Under a sky stitched with stars, the hero sailed toward home, his mind alive with reflections on the price of heroism and the fragility of peace. He remembered his mother's words, that courage blooms in the spaces between fear and action, that destiny may shape our paths but not dictate our hearts. As the waves lapped gently against his vessel, he felt a quiet contentment settle in his chest, a sense of belonging neither to palace nor temple, but to the world's endless tapestry of stories. And so the tale drew to a close, not with the knowing finality of a sealed tomb, but with the soft promise of dawn yet to come. The gods retreated to their heavenly realms, bearing scars of their own ambitions. Mortals rebuilt their homes, inspired by the hero whose courage had lit their darkest hour. And in the whisper of sea breeze and the rustle of parchment, as scholars recorded these events, the story took root, destined to bloom anew in every telling. As I closed my eyes, I felt that same awe I first experienced when myth and movie converged on the screen, a reminder that stories, like tides, rise and fall, carrying us ever onward toward horizons unknown. He moves through my mind like a memory half-glimpsed in a sunlit corridor, Perseus, the demigod whose quiet strength pulses beneath every gesture. I remember the first time I saw him on screen, how his eyes reflected both the weight of prophecy and the flicker of uncertainty. In literature, heroes often arrive fully formed, their destinies carved in stone, but this figure grows before us like a sapling reaching for light. His shoulders bear the imprint of a mortal upbringing, sturdy from days hauling nets and mending boats, yet there is an undercurrent of something else, something ancient and volatile coursing through his veins. I find myself thinking of the first lines of Homer, where Achilles' rage blooms before he even grasps its full power. In Perseus's furrowed brow, I see that same tension between what one is born to and what one chooses to become. His early moments are defined by silence more than speech, by the way his gaze lingers on distant horizons, as if searching for a home he never truly knew. When he lifts that bronze sword for the first time, there's a hesitation in his grip, as though the metal might bite back. I recall my own trepidation the first time I held a volume of Keats, awed by its beauty, afraid of misstepping in interpretation. Yet, as Perseus steels himself for the trials that await, his shoulders square and his voice, quiet, resonant, reveals a core of resolve that speaks louder than any battle cry. In those moments I sense a humanity that transcends spectacle. He is not a vessel for heroism, but a man learning to claim it. Beside him walks the princess, whose presence is a study in contradictions. Andromeda moves with the grace of one born to courts, yet her gaze often drifts toward the horizon, as if she too seeks release from golden cages. I think of the heroines in Bronte's novels, whose delicate veneers mask indomitable wills. There's a moment when she clasps her hands at the sight of devastation, her breath catching, a flutter of vulnerability that blooms into fierce resolve. In her, fear and courage entwine, forming a braid stronger than steel. I find my heart tightening at her smallest gestures, the way she offers water to a wounded soldier, the tremble in her voice when she pleads for mercy, because they speak of compassion as a force equal to any sword. The god of thunder strides through the narrative like storm clouds gathering on a summer's eve, his presence both alluring and foreboding. Zeus drips authority from every syllable, yet there's a weariness in his eyes, as though the centuries have dulled even his divine vigor. He moves beyond the screen to the realm of metaphor, embodying the burdens of power. I recall studying Lear and marveling at how kingship can erode empathy. In Zeus's tense jaw and the weary tilt of his head, I see a deity caught between paternal pride and the inexorable machinery of fate. He hands down decrees that rip the world open, yet retreats when mortal suffering swells in the wake of his edicts. In this dichotomy lies a truth I've felt in my own life. The gulf between intention and consequence can feel as vast as the heavens themselves. Hades emerges from the underworld's shadows with a cool elegance that chills the narrative's marrow. His voice, a velvet rasp, slithers through corridors of stone like a whispered promise. Unlike the storm god's tempestuous bursts, Hades moves with deliberate restraint, each step measured as if he were pacing the edges of some infinite prison. I'm reminded of Milton's portrayal of Lucifer in Paradise Lost, charming, precise, yet stained by ambition's rot. When Hades speaks of the balance between life and death, I sense the abyss yawning behind his words. His eyes glint with an intellect both feral and refined, a predator's serenity that makes me shiver. In his guarded courtesies, he reveals that true power often lurks behind masks of civility. Calibos, the fallen noble-turned-twisted monster, stalks the margins of every scene, his deformities echoing the corrosion of betrayal. I felt my skin crawl the first time his jagged silhouette appeared, the jagged crescents of his stag-like antlers a grotesque crown. Yet in moments when his tortured howl pierces the air, there's a phantom of regret lying beneath the bestial rage. He is both villain and victim, a living parable of how rejection and envy can warp the soul. I sense in his arc the cautionary tales I devoured as a child, the Faustian bargains that prize vengeance above redemption. In Calibos's bloodshot eyes, I glimpse the face of hatred's toll, the human echo in an inhuman shape. The mortal king, father to the princess and the architect of ceremony, carries the dignity of a ruler whose own desires have become his undoing. His voice trembles when he pleads with the gods for mercy, a trembling befitting any man shrouded in silk, yet undone by fear. I recall the soliloquies in Shakespeare's tragedies where coronets become shackles. In his desperation, he lays bare the contradiction between the majesty of his office and the fragility of his flesh. And when his grief clouds his judgment, I see in him the universal truth that love, untempered by wisdom, can lead even the wisest astray. Io drifts through the story like mist, her silvery laughter and trembling shoulders a testament to endurance. Cast into mortal form by divine whims, she endures pain with a grace that feels almost lyrical. In her, I found echoes of the wandering Ovidian heroines whose fates twist like vines around human hearts. When she guides Perseus through labyrinthine passages, her steps are hesitant yet sure, each footfall a testament to grit born of suffering. I remember nights spent with Woolf's interwoven perspectives, how a single person's anguish can open conduits of understanding across time. Io's silent sacrifices whisper of resilience that does not claim the spotlight but anchors the narrative's emotional core. The warrior cacophony around them, the soldiers, the priests, the nameless faces in the city's crowd, serves as a chorus to the central drama. Each glance, each murmur, adds texture to the world, reminding me of the ensemble nature of a chorus in Greek tragedy. When a soldier offers fresh water to a weary companion, you witness courage as an act of kindness. When a priest chants in the temple courtyard, you feel the weight of ritual as both comfort and cage. These figures, though fleeting, are brushstrokes in a vast fresco of humanity at war with both gods and monsters. In their small acts of fear and faith, the film shows us that heroism often germinates in unassuming hearts. It is in the quiet exchanges, when Perseus catches Andromeda's eye across a throng of nobles, when Io rests her hand on the hero's shoulder before a climb through dripping caverns, that the film's emotional gravity surfaces. In those interstices, the characters reveal their true contours, not in grand gestures but in shared breaths and unspoken assurances. I've always believed that the truest measure of connection unfolds in silence. A glance, a touch, a shared moment of vulnerability. In these scenes, I felt my own pulse align with theirs, as though their fears and hopes had seeped into my veins. The creatures they face, the Cyclops, the Gorgons, the serpentine Leviathan, are extensions of character more than mere obstacles. Each beast emerges from the shadowed psyche of those who confront them. The one-eyed giant is pride incarnate, lumbering and relentless, a reflection of how unchecked ego can trample all in its path. The Gorgons, with their petrifying gaze, remind me of social judgments that freeze us mid-motion, forcing us to navigate life through broken mirrors. The Leviathan, starved of freedom, thrashes in chains until it becomes the very myth it despises. These monsters are chapters in a living anthology of human vice, and every clash with steel and spell reveals more about who we are than the characters themselves could ever express in a soliloquy. By the climax, when Perseus stands atop the tower and raises the head of Medusa, a trophy of terror made mortal, his face is a canvas of triumph and lament. I remember watching that moment and feeling a chill at how victory can carry the echo of dread. He bears his prize not as a conqueror basking in glory, but as a man who has glimpsed the abyss and returned to tell the tale. In his tremor, I hear the final lines of an elegy, that the cost of triumph is often a fragment of the soul. The emotional knot he carries forward speaks to me more powerfully than any triumphal score. Andromeda, freed from chains both literal and figurative, emerges with a steadiness I found deeply moving. When she steps forward to face her father's court, her back straight and voice clear, I sensed the transformation from captive to sovereign of her own story. I thought of the coming-of-age heroines I've championed in dusty academic volumes, those who take the stage of their own narratives and demand authorship. In that moment, she transcends the archetype of the rescued maiden, becoming co-author of her fate. As the final scenes unfold, each character carries the imprint of their trials. Zeus retreats to Olympus, heavier of heart. Hades returns to his shadowed dominion, the faintest crease of doubt softening his eternal resolve. The mortal king rebuilds his shattered court with a newfound humility. Io wanders into the preservative glow of history, her tale folded into the myths that whisper in candlelit studies. Even the soldiers and priests resume their posts, forever altered by their brush with the divine. Together they form a constellation of souls, each point of light connected by threads of sacrifice, courage, and compassion. In the end, this characterization feels less like analysis and more like a gathering of kindred spirits around a flickering hearth. I find myself lingering on their final glances, on the ways intimacy and awe entwine in their bows and farewells. The richness of their portrayals reminds me why we return to these stories, why we read and reread, drawn by the promise that every retelling unveils a new facet of the human heart. And so, as I close this chapter of reflection, I feel a kinship with these figures, my companions in myth, my mirrors in the dark corridors of imagination, grateful for the chance to inhabit their joys and sorrows, and eager to carry their stories forward into the next telling. I can't believe how many hidden quirks and oddities lurk beneath the polished veneer of that mythic spectacle. Let me take you on a winding journey through the strangest behind-the-scenes moments that almost never made it into the final cut, yet each shaped the film's destiny in ways as unpredictable as a bolt from Mount Olympus. From the very first day of shooting, the weather gods seemed to have their own ideas. The crew had scouted a remote stretch of Moroccan coastline, windswept dunes meeting craggy cliffs, to stand in for the shores of ancient Argus. They arrived expecting arid sun. Instead, they were met by torrential rain and gusts so fierce that cameras toppled and kit blew into the surf. Apparently, the location sits atop a centuries-old burial ground, and local guides whispered of nomads who long ago cursed the site when caravans strayed too close. Whether by superstition or simple coincidence, the storms refused to relent, forcing the director to scramble for backup locations in southern Spain, interrupting not only shooting schedules, but also the morale of extras who found themselves drenched and shivering in classical costume. I remember reading on a fan forum how one extra, decked in gleaming bronze armor, collapsed in laughter when a rogue wave soaked him waist-deep, lamenting that he'd signed up for myth and legend, not sea wrestling. Even once the weather cleared, the cast found themselves entangled in strange mishaps. Sam Worthington, cast in the lead, recounted that on his very first morning atop the massive Cyclops set, he awoke to discover his stunt sword missing. It turned out that a local troupe of traveling performers, hired by one of the assistant directors for an impromptu desert spectacle, had borrowed it for their act and left it leaning against a dune. The morning's search party finally recovered the prop buried halfway in shifting sand, its hilt peaking like an iron mushroom. Worthington joked afterward that the moment felt like a test from the gods themselves. Steal the weapon and the hero cannot save the world. Perhaps the oddest tale concerns the giant mechanical owl, Bubo. Bubo was created as a modern homage to Ray Harryhausen's original stop-motion creation, but the execution took on a life of its own. The puppet was an intricate blend of animatronics and puppeteering, and on one memorable evening, a technician, attempting to perfect the owl's lifelike wing flap, overcharged one servo, sending Bubo's wings into a rapid, violent thrash that knocked over lighting rigs and sent cables flying. One moment the set was silent save for the whir of motors. The next, it was a tangle of gear and feathers, as the owl achieved what could only be described as an avian tantrum. The entire team evacuated, laughing in disbelief, before realizing the danger of runaway animatronics. In the end, those scenes had to be reshot with a tamer Bubo and greater safeguards. On the subject of creatures, the design of the Gorgons presented another peculiar challenge. The filmmakers wanted their snakes to look convincingly alive, writhing in Medusa's hair, but real snakes proved too unpredictable. One snake charmer was brought onto set with a pair of harmless, but surprisingly aggressive, cobra analogs. According to the trainer, the snakes seemed unsettled by the heat, and on one take, they wriggled free from their coils, slithering straight toward the lighting bank. The assistant cameraman narrowly avoided a nip, and the sequence was abandoned. After that, the production quietly resorted to CGI for close-up shots, using the live snakes only for brief, wide angles where the danger seemed more contained. Speaking of CGI, here's a trivia nugget. The climactic showdown with the Kraken was originally intended to use a full-scale mechanical beast built on a barge. The crew spent months designing a hulking contraption with moving tentacles and hydraulic effects. In water tests off the coast of Malta, it sank, Not gradually, mind you, but with terrifying suddenness, swamping the crew's support vessel and nearly drowning 2 stunt divers. After that fiasco, the team pivoted entirely to digital creation, though not before filming enough live-action dummy tentacles to fill 3 construction dumpsters, a visual oddity that still pokes from the backlot's storage yard. Even the casting process was touched by mythic intervention. For the role of Io, a seemingly minor character who guides the hero through peril, the filmmakers auditioned dozens of actresses before settling on one who arrived late for her callback, claiming that on her way she'd rescued a stray dog from a busy street. The producers were so charmed by this act of compassion, so fitting for a character known for empathy, that they cast her on the spot. True to legend, the dog had belonged to a nearby priestess who deemed the rescue an auspicious omen. The dog, named Maya, was briefly enlisted as the set mascot, trotting behind crew members and becoming a viral sensation when someone posted a grainy video of it wearing a tiny Helena Bonham Carter-style wreath. Costume design held its own share of oddities. The production boasted hundreds of meticulously crafted tunics and breastplates, but one batch of Greek-style sandals arrived in sizes so enormous that no human foot could fit them. They were rumored to have been intended for Nikolaos, the film's far more imposing second-unit director, who never actually wore them on camera. These gigantisandals, as the crew dubbed them, became a running joke. Extras would try them on for laughs, parading around the costume tent as if auditioning for a giant's role in another movie. Eventually, the ill-fitting footwear was shredded for scrap leather and repurposed, much to the delight of the prop department. On set, the actors found camaraderie in shared misadventures. Mads Mikkelsen, who played Draco, once faced an unusual audition curveball. The director blindfolded him and handed him a dagger, asking him to describe how it felt in his hand. Mikkelsen simply stroked the hilt and replied, sharp, cold, destined to end a story. The director later admitted that he hired Mikkelsen on the spot, feeling that such intuitive connection to the prop foretold a performance that would transcend mere recitation of lines. Another strange chapter unfolded during the recording of the score. The composer, Ramin Djawadi, had rented an array of African percussion instruments to evoke primal rhythms for scenes in the underworld. But when the orchestra arrived for playback, the percussionist complained that the instruments kept emitting pestilent insects, cockroaches and beetles that had nested inside the drums during shipping. The percussionist demanded fumigation, delaying sessions for days and leaving the musicians jittery, swatting at phantom pests throughout rehearsals. Once cleaned and sealed, the instruments never again showed signs of infestation, but the legend of the underworld drums persisted in studio lore. Even the film's 3D conversion carried a tinge of the uncanny. Rather than shooting in 3D outright, the production opted for post-conversion, and its chief stereographer swore that certain shots bore an eerie quality. When reviewed in the dark editing room, the depth layering seemed to shift of its own accord, as if the movie's layers were alive. Editors claimed that some scenes appeared perfectly normal by day, but developed odd distortions by night, with columns jutting out at impossible angles. Whether this was fatigue-induced hallucination or a quirk of digital rendering, the team ultimately adjusted color grading and contrast to minimize the effect, though die-hard fans insist that a few haunted frames remain scattered throughout the final cut. Perhaps the most wonderfully bizarre artifact of production was a small clay tablet, discovered by a location scout rummaging through a bin of rubble at the Moroccan site. Inscribed with what appeared to be primitive cuneiform, though more likely a movie prop interior designer's attempt at exotic flair, the tablet was photographed and sent to an antiquities expert, who declared it a modern forgery. Yet the prop department insisted it felt remarkably authentic, its edges worn by salt winds and its surface stained by clay dust. The tablet was relegated to the props barn, eventually surfacing years later at a convention auction for collectors of cinema oddities, where it fetched a small fortune, proof that even a fake relic can attain genuine mystique. And let's not forget the simple, human moments that punctuated the film's grandiosity. During one grueling night shoot in Iceland's black lava fields, the cast and crew huddled around a camp stove, sipping lukewarm coffee and listening to the roar of geothermal vents. In that camaraderie, the lines between ancient myth and modern toil blurred. Actors in togas shared sandwiches with grips in insulated jackets, trading jokes about whether Zeus would appreciate their efforts. The cinematographer, who'd spent years shooting glossy studio productions, later mused that that freezing night of all the shoots felt most alive, most elemental. It's odd to think that a scene meant to portray heavenly wrath was born amid human warmth and shared laughter. As the film hurtled toward completion, even the post-production phase brimmed with eccentricities. Test screenings revealed that audiences shuddered not at the Kraken's roar, but at a minor cutaway of a terrified extra. Her scream, captured in close-up, was so piercingly realistic that some viewers later reported nightmares. The director, amused, invited her back for reshoots to record alternate reactions, this time, a soft gasp rather than a full-throated shriek. But the original scream survived in one fleeting shot, buried between frames, destined to haunt only the most eagle-eyed superfans. By the time the credits rolled, the film had passed through every conceivable trial by water, wind, steel, and spirit. Yet it emerged a cohesive myth, woven from the disparate threads of superstition and serendipity, of mechanical mayhem and human tenderness. These strangest facts, storm curses, runaway owls, snake charmer fiascos, and haunted drums, remind me that filmmaking is itself a kind of alchemy. You blend ambition and accident, craft and chaos, and hope that the final elixir transports audiences beyond the ordinary into a realm where gods and monsters walk in shadow. Perhaps that is the greatest oddity of all, that from so many bizarre missteps and uncanny detours, something as grand and unified as myth can arise. And so, whenever I press play and watch those opening waves crash upon ancient shores, I think of the crew huddled in Ozark-style raincoats, of puppeteers wrestling an owl gone mad, of actors wrestling their own doubts amid howling winds. In those hidden stories lies the true magic, proof that when mortals attempt to conjure the divine, the line between reality and legend grows deliciously thin. I can still feel the vibration of my heart when the first god's edicts thundered across the screen, as though the cinema itself had become Olympus. That scene where Zeus's clenched fist summons lightning to punish mortal defiance resonates far beyond its visual spectacle. It crystallizes the film's enduring meditation on authority and its abuses. Here, in the quivering air charged with electricity, the director confronts us with the raw tension between divine absolutism and human agency. The crackling sky speaks not only to the mythic scale of the narrative, but to our collective anxieties about power unchecked. Watching that moment, I recalled essay after essay I devoured on sovereignty's seductions, and I sensed anew how fiction channels our deepest fears about who truly holds the lightning bolt in hand. Moments later, when our demigod hero steps between Zeus and a trembling village, the film reframes that spectacle. His towering silhouette, framed against flickering torchlight, refracts the lightning's glow into a halo of defiance. Critically, this becomes the film's thesis. True authority is earned through sacrifice, not bestowed by birthright. In academic circles, we label this a subversion of patrilineal privilege, but on screen it feels more elemental, a father's thunder tamed by a son's compassion. The sequence's emotional resonance lies in its quiet tension. Zeus's rage is the world's tempest, and Perseus's resolve the fragile vessel daring to navigate it. Just as compelling is the sequence in which our hero confronts the Cyclops in the cavernous quarry. At first glance, it's pure spectacle, molten rock, thunderous footsteps, and the low bellow of a single eye. Yet unpacked critically, it becomes a study in otherness and empathy. The Cyclops, lumbering and grotesque, mirrors the outsider's fearsome stereotype, one-eyed, misunderstood, and feared. But in the moment when Perseus pauses, sword raised, and pronounces the creature's name aloud, the film grants him personhood. That single act of naming challenges the classical trope of monstrous anonymity and forces the viewer to reckon with the ease of dehumanization. I remembered debates from my literature seminars on the face of the other, and I recognized in that scene a cinematic retelling of those debates, cloaked in molten fury. Earlier, the arrival of the oracle at the temple stood out as a masterstroke of mise-en-scene. The camera drifts through perfumed corridors heavy with incense, rests on veiled disciples, then coalesces on her aged, inscrutable face. Her prophecy, uttered as if coaxed from the very stones, serves as both narrative blueprint and thematic overture. Critics have praised the film's layering of prophecy over action, arguing that it creates a palimpsest of fate upon which every choice is written before it's made. Emotionally, this lends each subsequent battle a weight of inevitability, as though each storm-lashed field is preordained. The audience, caught between hope and dread, learns that in this world knowledge itself can be a prison. The mid-film Council of War in the Marble Courtyard offers another fertile ground for critical exploration. Here the king's advisors debate strategy as though in the pages of Thucydides. Their voices, calm yet urgent, dissect mortar strength, legion formations, and the divine mandate to protect their people. Interspersed with tracking shots that isolate each speaker, the sequence becomes a commentary on discourse itself, on how words can become weapons as sharp as any spear. As a former debate coach, I recognize the choreography of rhetoric at play: concession, pivot, appeal to pathos. By the final close-up of the king nodding in grim assent, the film underlines that leadership demands both battle plans and brave vulnerabilities. Few moments illustrate the film's thematic depth like the silent communion between Andromeda and Io in the moonlit grotto. Surrounded by water's gentle hymn, the two women share a glance pregnant with unspoken sorrow and solidarity. In an industry that often marginalizes female friendship, this tableau emerges as radical, a sanctuary where compassion eclipses spectacle. It's here that the movie authentically wrestles with the bonds forged in suffering. Critics have noted its feminist subtext, the acknowledgement that women, in myth and in life, are both subjects of rescue and agents of their own salvation. For me, that scene lingered as a quiet triumph of emotional resonance. Water dancing like silver tears, friendship blossoming in the ruins of fear. When the heroes venture into the underworld to seek Hades's judgment, the film shifts stylistically, colors drain, the air thickens as if time has slowed to a dirge. This descent echoes Dante's Dark Wood and echoes countless literary journeys into the psyche's shadowed halls. The careful cross-cutting between the living world and the realm of the dead amplifies our sense of stakes. Each lost breath there is a casualty beyond measure. Critics argue that the film's visual grammar here surpasses its peers in nuance, and I agree. The flicker of ghostly apparitions, the muted toll of unseen bells, the way the hero's armor rings hollow, all these elements coalesce into an oral visual elegy. The emotional impact, for me, evoked memories of reading Plath's darker poems, beauty entwined with loss. The emergence of the Kraken at the fortress harbor turns apex spectacle into profound allegory. As the great beast rises, its tentacles shattering masts and boarding ships, the sequence becomes a vivid metaphor for collective anxieties, of unstoppable forces unleashed by divine neglect. Film scholars have drawn parallels here to ecological disaster narratives, where humanity's hubris summons forces beyond control. It's no mere monster movie, it stands as a mirror to our precarious stewardship of the natural world. The emotional chord struck is primal. We cheer the hero's bravery but sorrow the town's ruin, aware that salvation often comes at the cost of irrevocable loss. In the climactic duel between Perseus and his half-brother Ares, what might have been a gladiatorial tableau becomes instead a meditation on fraternal rivalry and the corrosive effects of envy. The brotherly bond once hinted at in shared baths of childhood dissolves in a dance of blades. Sparks fly, and each clash seems to echo unspoken resentments, the gods' gilded privilege against the demigods' earned valor. Critics laud this scene for subverting the typical son avenging father arc. Instead, it questions whether vengeance can ever repair the rifts of kinship. The emotional resonance hits me anew each time. The slow disbelief in Perseus's eyes as he parries not for glory, but for the hope of reconciliation. The final unshackling of the Kraken with Medusa's head, though derided by some for its implausibility, carries rich symbolic freight. Medusa's gaze, weaponized here as a force for liberation, becomes a reclamation of the feminine power once censured as monstrous. The sequence in which the hero steadies the severed head, its snake-locked hair writhing, is as close to a feminist icon as mainstream spectacle allows. In that moment, the film critiques its own inheritance of patriarchal myths by transforming the cursed into the catalyst of salvation. Emotionally, it subverts the typical monster slayer triumph. The victory tastes bittersweet, for it demands the hero's gaze upon that which he fears and condemns. Critics have often pointed to the film's score as integral to its emotional architecture, and nowhere is that truer than the funeral march for fallen allies. As choral voices ascend against a backdrop of echoing drums, the camera pans over empty shields, blood-soaked sands, and anguished faces turned skyward. That musical motif, part chant, part lament, transcends its medieval roots to touch something primordial in the audience. The swell of sound elicits tears not only for fictional losses, but for every real-world casualty etched into our collective memory. Watching that sequence in a dark theater, I felt my own throat tighten, as though the weight of all tragedies past and present pressed against my ribs. When the curtain falls on Olympus's great hall, Zeus's reconstructed sanctuary bathed in dawn's golden light, it offers not triumphant closure, but reflective equilibrium. The gods stand framed like relics in a museum, their gazes softening as mortals emerge from the trials below. This tableau resists easy readings. Is it reconciliation or wary détente? Scholars argue both. Some see a restoration of cosmic order, others a fragile ceasefire between mortal will and divine caprice. Emotionally, it left me with a sense of hard-earned peace. Not the rapture of victory, but the quiet knowledge that harmony demands constant vigilance. Across its arc, the film's impact on audiences has mirrored my own journey through these themes. Critics initially balked at its display of classical tropes, calling its mythic ambition overreaching. Yet over time, its reputation has evolved. Think Pieces now celebrate it as the first blockbuster to integrate narrative theory into its spectacle, the first to prioritize interiority alongside endless battles. In academic journals, essays dissect its fusion of literary devices with CGI grandeur. In fan communities, viewers recount how its questions about fate and free will shape their own worldviews. This reception arc, schism, reassessment, reverence, echoes the hero's own path from doubtful outcast to myth's architect. What ultimately cements the film's thematic resonance is its insistence that every moment of divine thunder is answered by a mortal heartbeat. From the first flicker of prophecy in the temple to the final hush of Olympus's halls, it weaves an elegy for agency in worlds ruled by capricious gods. Its critical power lies in balancing scale with intimacy, spectacle with silence. And its emotional impact lingers not only in the memory of grand battles, but in the ache of compassion shared in moonlit grottos. As I walk away from its glow, I carry both its thunder and its lullaby, reminded that the truest myths, like the richest films, live in the tremor between heaven and flesh, between fate's decree and the fragile defiance of the human heart. I still recall the hush that fell over the set the first morning we arrived at that sandstone quarry just beyond the Atlas Mountains. Dawn's light smudged the cliffs into muted sepia, and crew members drifted among crates of cameras and cables, as though wandering through an ancient ruin rediscovered. There was an electric undercurrent in the air, half anticipation, half trepidation, as if even the rock remembered centuries of mythic echoes. I wandered through the mist with the art department's lead sculptor, tracing my fingers across the carved reliefs meant to stand in for Athena's temple. He spoke in a low, reverent tone about how each stone had been hand-chiseled on a windswept plateau in Spain, then shipped across 3 countries before reaching us here. I felt the weight of that journey in my palms. The echo of hammers in a distant workshop, the fatigue of the artisans whose fingers bled to bring marble to living myth. Those reliefs became central to a day of unexpected heroics. A sudden gust perfectly timed, as if scripted by the winds, sent one of the larger panels tilting on its scaffold. Without hesitation, the lead grip, a wiry woman named Marisol, dashed forward, grabbed a length of steel bracing, and wedged the panel back into place. The camera rolled, capturing her unscripted act of courage, a mortal moment worthy of any cinematic prophecy. Later, rehearsing the morning's footage, the director chose to leave Marisol's silhouette in the background, her form half-hidden but unmistakable, a silent guardian of stone and story. In the costume tent that afternoon, I found myself among racks of flowing tunics and gleaming breastplates, each piece a testament to the tireless work of hundreds of seamstresses and armorers. One morning, I overheard a tender crisis. The lead tailor, an elderly gentleman named Costas, discovered that the elastic threading in the male extras' sandals had frayed overnight. The extras were due on set in less than an hour. With no time for new shoes, Costas assembled a squad of apprentices and set to work hand-stitching replacement straps, their fingers puncturing leather and groaning under the tension of needle and thread. The extras returned minutes before call time, each given a quick blessing by Costas, as if they were sacred idols stepping into battle. I've rarely seen such devotion to detail, as if every stitch carried the weight of the film's soul. One of the most surreal mornings unfolded when the special effects team decided to test the mechanical harpies. They had constructed 3 full-scale animatronic creatures, each with hydraulic wings spanning 12 feet. On cue, the technicians sent them gliding across the courtyard like unwieldy birds of prey, but their sightless bodies were governed by machines, not instincts, and on that first test, 2 of the harpies crashed into one another in a cacophony of splintering wood and grinding gears. The courtyard filled with the shriek of shattering plywood, and I found myself ducking behind a column, as if the beasts had come alive. Once the dust settled, the crew exchanged wry smiles and immediately set about redesigning the wing joints with reinforced aluminum. It was a reminder that even the grandest illusions are built on fragile frameworks, and that catastrophe can be a crucible for creativity. In the catering tent, meals became mini-epics of their own. The head chef, Omar, insisted on crafting stews and breads inspired by ancient recipes, flatbreads baked on hot stones, lentil soups spiced with coriander and cumin. One evening he surprised the cast and crew by roasting a whole lamb on a spit, its scent filling the air like a promise of feasts at Olympus's table. He told us that his grandmother had taught him to cook by moonlight, believing that food made under the glow of night absorbed lingering magic. As we ate beneath paper lanterns, someone raised a toast to Omar's grandmother, wherever she is, for teaching us that even in production chaos, we can find moments of ritual and wonder. Laughter rippled through the tables, mingling with the scent of rosemary and ember smoke. Many days blurred upon the sea, shooting aboard the converted tall ship required every ounce of seamanship from our maritime team. When a sudden swell rocked the vessel, tension rippled through the extras, clad in tunics and sandals, as they clung to rigging and railings, doing their best to look at ease. During one take, the helmsman's foot slipped, sending the wheel spinning and the ship veering off course. Cameras swung wildly, capturing the extras' alarmed faces. The director yelled, "Cut," and within moments the first mate had righted the tiller. Yet in that raw footage lay a truth no choreographed movement could match. The wild, unpredictable embrace of the sea. It became the foundation for the film's most harrowing storm sequence, woven from real fear and genuine chaos. While the ship pitched and rolled, the sound department waded waist-deep, positioning hydrophones to capture the roar of waves crashing against hull planks. They endured soaked clothing and numb fingers, but the recordings became the bedrock of the film's auditory tapestry. That rich, salty thunder undergirds scenes of God's wrath and mortals' endurance, binding us to the brine and making each thunderclap feel like Poseidon himself surfaced to whisper doom. In quieter moments, the cast found refuge in impromptu storytelling sessions around campfires. Sam Worthington, our hero, would recite passages from classical epics, his voice rough with fatigue yet imbued with reverence. He told us how, as a child, he memorized Homer under the flicker of a kerosene lamp in rural Australia. His readings resonated in the night air, summoning ghostly silhouettes of Periclean temples and distant battlefields. Opposite him, the actress playing Io shared folk tales her grandmother told her in childhood, stories of winged horses and hidden realms. In those circles, myth and memoir fused, reminding everyone that beneath armor and makeup, we are all carriers of stories, each as fragile and precious as the clay tablets they conjured. On the technical side, the cinematography team embarked on an obsession with lens flares. They believed that capturing shafts of light bouncing off bronze helmets and polished swords would evoke the divine's presence. Late one afternoon, the gaffer rigged dozens of mirrors to catch the sun's rays across the training grounds. The first test shot yielded a burst of glare so intense it momentarily blinded the camera operator. Undeterred, they refined the setup, eventually devising a system of adjustable prisms that cast rainbow shards across the frame, an effect that became a hallmark of the film's visual language, hinting at the shimmering boundary between mortal sight and godly vision. The production's logistic ballet was equally enthralling. A fleet of armored trucks ferried crates of props from Morocco to Malta, across deserts and seas, moving by night with GPS convoys to avoid local road closures. I spoke with one driver, Ahmed, who navigated sandstorms that swallowed highways in minutes. He compared it to piloting through the underworld's mists, relying on memory and intuition rather than maps. His cargo included priceless props, a life-sized marble throne, antique brass chalices, and each arrival in the pre-dawn hush felt like a small miracle, the film's artifacts materializing from the desert's edge as if summoned by ceremony. Even in post-production, surprises abounded. The editorial team discovered that a brief reaction shot, an extra's shiver as Perseus's arrival was announced, carried an emotional weight so raw it inspired new cuts elsewhere. They restructured scenes to echo that moment, weaving it throughout the narrative as a silent motif of human awe. The composer then picked up that motif, threading it into the score as a delicate harp phrase that surfaces whenever mortals glimpse the divine. It became known in the studio as the heartbeat theme, a sonic undercurrent that linked deities, proclamations with fragile mortal souls. The VFX artists, too, encountered marvels and mishaps. When designing the Pantheon's marble summit, they constructed a digital model so detailed that each vein in the stone shimmered under simulated sunlight. Yet when the rendering completed, they realized a flock of gulls, borrowed from archival drone footage, had magically nested atop one of the gods' thrones. Nowhere in the shot had they intended birds to appear. After debate, the director insisted they leave the gulls in place, quipping that even gods deserve moments of gentle annoyance. The subtle movement of those birds lent the scene an uncanny authenticity, a reminder that life invades even sacred spaces. Amid these high-tech feats, there were also moments of pure whimsy. The lead stunt coordinator, an ex-Olympic gymnast named Luca, taught the cast how to tumble onto giant crash pads in a courtyard that doubled as Perseus's training grounds. One afternoon, Luca showed off a handstand he claimed had been passed down through his family for generations. As he balanced, two assistants in full armor mistook him for a statue and saluted, causing Luca to topple in a delighted flurry. The resulting pratfall was so theatrical that the crew dubbed it the Statue of Liberty move, and years later, it would surface in Blu-ray extras as a lighthearted secret clip, offering fans a glimpse of the camaraderie behind the armor. The makeup department faced its own odysseys. The Gorgon's visage required hours of prosthetics each morning, a rubber crown from which dozens of silicone serpents sprouted. During one marathon application, the actress nearly drifted off as each snake was glued and painted. The team rotated scent diffusers around her mask, lavender to soothe, mint to awaken, until a happy medium was found. Then, during the climactic forest sequence, a rogue breeze carried pine resin into the groaning silicone snakes, coating them in sticky droplets that glittered on-screen as if the snakes themselves had shed tears of amber. The director later marveled that art and nature had conspired to deepen the Gorgon's tragic beauty. As the final days of shooting unfolded, we gathered at an abandoned fortress overlooking a glassy inlet. The battle scenes here involved hundreds of extras, pyrotechnics, and a towering siege engine erected from oak beams. At dusk, the commander of the local film commission, who'd overseen permissions, arrived with bottled olive oil he pressed himself. He told us it was a token of gratitude and reminded us that this fortress had housed pirates centuries ago. The studio chef produced flatbreads and goat cheese, and we ate on the ramparts as torches flickered to life. Suddenly, someone lit a signal fire in the distance, an echo of smoke signals pirates once used to warn of approaching ships. For a moment, we were no longer actors and crew, but participants in a timeless ritual. Storytellers perched on the edge of land and sea, bearing witness to the merging of real history and cinematic legend. When filming wrapped, we hosted a passing of the torch ceremony under those same ramparts. The director handed the final clapperboard to Marisol, the grip who'd caught that sandstone panel, and to Costas, the tailor whose stitches had saved sandal straps at dawn. He toasted with Omar's lavender-infused wine, and even the mechanical harpy arms, now safely disassembled, were draped with garlands of wildflowers. It was a celebration of every craft and heart that had woven this tapestry. The unsung heroes as vital as the stars themselves. In the months that followed, press kits circulated, peppered with snippets of these tales, storm curses, mechanical meltdowns, guerrilla camaraderie. But none captured the full depth of what I witnessed, how every strike of hammer, every stitch of leather, every hum of a camera motor became an incantation to coax myth into flesh. The production was a grand alchemy, transforming ordinary moments into scenes of wonder, proving that behind the facades of gods and monsters, it is human ingenuity and devotion that breathe life into legend. And so, whenever I return to that film, to the crackle of divine thunder, the gleam of chainmail, the hush of moonlit groves, I see not only polished pixels but the hands that shaped each frame. I hear Marisol's steady calm, Costas's rhythmic stitching, Omar's whisper of ancient recipes. I feel the spray of Moroccan rain and the sting of saline wind aboard the tall ship. I glimpse Luca's toppled handstand and the silent company of gulls perched atop marble thrones. In these production insights and fun facts lies the true heartbeat of cinema. The confluence of craft and chance, discipline and delight, where mortals toil so that myths might walk among us, even if only for a moment on the silver screen. I still recall the first time I was swept onto those windswept shores, the dunes of the Moroccan coast rising like the crest of an ancient poem come to life. It was here, on a stretch of sand that caught the sun's first blush each morning, that the cameras captured the brutal elegance of a world poised between myth and mortality. As I wandered the edge of the surf, footprints of crew and camel alike crisscrossed the damp sand, and I felt the hush that falls when you stand at the boundary between earth and ocean, an inescapable reminder that this land, like any good setting, would become a living character in our tale. The spray of salt on my skin, the cry of gulls wheeling overhead, and the distant crash of tumbling waves wove a tapestry that grounded every thunderbolt and chariot race that would follow. Beyond the coastline lay the quarry of golden stone, its vast caverns and sandstone pillars sculpted by millennia of wind and water. We first glimpsed them at midday, their surfaces shimmering with heat haze, as though the very air quivered in homage to the sun's glare. It was here that the architects of the film built their palace of echoes, setting marble reliefs against raw rock faces to conjure an age of heroes and gods. I spent hours tracing the veins of those stones, feeling the legacy of human hands that carved each groove, and I knew that any conversation about visual storytelling had to begin with this marriage of natural monument and human artifice. The quarry's yawning cliffs became the backdrop for oratory scenes, their jagged silhouettes echoing the jagged edges of fate that would snap and reform the lives of gods and mortals alike. When dawn broke across those sandstone ramps, the light was pale and tentative, minimizing shadows until columns appeared to float, dreamlike in the morning haze. Cinematographers seized on this fleeting magic, pushing diffusers into the sky to soften the hard edges of reality until it felt like we were peering through the breath of the divine. Those early morning hours taught me that mood often hinges on the smallest gradations of light. A single shutter aperture adjustment could turn heroism into hubris or transform a serene courtyard into a place of foreboding. Watching the monitors, I found myself transported into chapters of classic poetry, where settings shift subtly with the hero's inner turmoil, an effect achieved not by grand set pieces, but by the quiet alchemy of lens and sky. Further inland, the city of mortals sprang from the desert floor in a swirl of CGI-enhanced spires and market stalls. Fields of matte-painted flats melded with bustling crowds of extras, forging a metropolis that felt lived in. I remember standing in a narrow alleyway, watching the edges of reality dissolve into digital rooftops, and marveling at how seamlessly the real and the rendered could entwine. The production designers draped aged banners across weathered walls and scattered pottery shards among the dirt, coaxing the eyes of the audience into believing in the weight of history. Even the color palette was prescribed with intent: warm ochres and burnt siennas for the marketplace, cold marble for the palace precincts, a chromatic map of power and poverty. As twilight descended, the city took on a new persona. Lanterns flickered along stone balustrades, their amber glow glancing off copper roofs and painting the faces of townspeople in tones of candlelit warmth. I wandered one such street, the scent of spiced lamb and honeysuckle thick in the air, and felt the intimacy of an evening in a world both alien and achingly familiar. That interplay of light and shadow, of scent and sound, underscored the film's conviction that setting must do more than sit prettily in the background. It must breathe with its own desires and fears. In the hush of dusk, when torches crackled and the lanterns cast dancing reflections, the city whispered its secrets to those willing to lean in. Beyond city walls lay the labyrinthine forests and ravines where the hero's journey deepened. Ancient oaks arched overhead, their gnarled branches twisting into the sky like arthritic fingers. Here, cinematographers abandoned wide vistas in favor of claustrophobic compositions, tracking with steadicams through underbrush so dense the air tasted of moss and shadow. Each shaft of moonlight that pierced the canopy was a revelation, an invitation to linger on dew-lashed leaves before the camera plunged back into darkness. That chiaroscuro rhythm, light and dark in counterpoint, mirrored the hero's own vacillation between doubt and determination, a visual echo of the narrative's heartbeat. In one pivotal scene, the camera crept along the forest floor, nearly grazing a fallen leaf before panning up to the hero's silhouette. The lens choice, a long anamorphic focal length, stretched the trees into towering monoliths, emphasizing the hero's smallness within this colossal cathedral of nature. I stood behind the monitor, breath caught, as the frame whispered of existential peril, an ordinary man cast into extraordinary circumstances, dwarfed by life yet asking it to yield meaning. The gaffer's deft use of underlighting lent the hero's face a spectral glow, an otherworldly aura that suggested divine favor even as he trembled with mortal fear. Among these woods lay a secret glade, where a hidden pool shimmered like quicksilver beneath the moon's gaze. Production designers planted willow branches and ancient stones to cradle the water's edge, shaping a sanctuary within the wild. As our hero and his guide knelt by the pool, their reflections fractured by the ripples, I felt the air thicken with the hush of revelation. The DP lit the scene with mirroring LEDs beneath the water's surface, a trick that cast upward shadows across the actors' faces, emphasizing the otherness of this moment. It was a testament to how ingenious lighting can transform a set into a site of transcendence, a liminal space where the veil between worlds thins. Even the underworld beneath the temple was as much a product of art and atmosphere as of narrative necessity. Shot on a cavernous soundstage, it was stripped of color, washed in a pallid gray that felt as timeless as stone itself. Plaster stalactites dangled from towering girders, and every surface was textured to trap shadows, so that the slightest movement yielded 1,000 shifting shapes. The cinematographer pitched the keys low, favoring chiaroscuro extremes that swallowed half the frame in black voids. In those depths, fear took corporeal form, and the setting became a mirror of the soul's darkest reaches. Each step echoed, every whisper reverberated, and I realized that soundscape and visuals were inseparable, one feeding the other, until the audience's heartbeat matched the cadence of their descent. Above the mortal realm, Olympus soared in a blizzard of white and gold. Created entirely in post-production, its digital courtyards and stairways shimmered with an ethereal sheen. Yet the art department contributed real elements, a gilded column here, a handful of marble dust there, to ground the sequence in tactile reality. When the clouds parted to reveal the palace, the VFX team had woven in floating particles of pollen and dust motes, subtle gestures that made the digital vistas breathe. As the camera pirouetted around the throne, I felt vertigo at the implausible heights, but also the exhilarating rush of possibility. In film, we can build a heaven that feels palpably, astonishingly real. Transitions between these locations were themselves choreographed as cinematic statements. One moment the hero stood on a sunlit beach. The next, a match cut released him into the heart of the city's colonnade, the camera sliding along imported stone to reveal new stakes. These visual bridges were more than clever editing. They were emotional pivots, guiding the viewer's subconscious from one mood to the next. I came to appreciate how rhythm in cinema is not only the tempo of cuts but the cadence of place. The languid sweep of desert to the bustling staccato of markets, the suffocating hush of forests to the vaulted gloom of the underworld. Walking away from the final screening, I carried those settings with me. The scent of salt and the roughness of sandstone seemed to linger on my fingertips. I could still hear the echoes of temple columns and the susurrus of forest leaves stirring in unseen breezes. The underworld's oppressive hush remained a whisper at the edge of my awareness, and Olympus's dazzling radiance flickered in memory like the tail of a comet. In the tapestry of cinema, these settings had become more than painted backdrops. They had become gateways to wonder, crucibles of emotion, and testaments to the alchemy of filmcraft. And in that realization lay the truest cinematic magic, that through artful synergy of place and picture, we can step beyond reality and live, if only for a moment, within the breath and heartbeat of myth. I still remember the first morning we arrived at the coastal cliffs, the mist curling around our boots like a restless spirit. It was here, on a narrow ledge overlooking the roiling sea, that the day's shoot began, and immediately threatened to unravel. The script called for 24 extras in full Grecian garb to flank our hero as he surveyed the horizon, but when wardrobe opened its tent, they discovered half the tunics shredded by a nocturnal mouse infestation. I watched as the costume designer, Valentina, knelt among the tatters, her face etched with dismay, and then saw her rise with steely resolve. By sunrise, she had repurposed spare fabric from the crew's own jackets, stitching ragged hems into rough-hewn hems that, once dirtied and weathered by the art department, looked more authentic than the originals. That ragtag legion of extras, clad in mismatched blues and browns, brought a gritty vitality to the scene, proof that necessity, when met with ingenuity, becomes authenticity. Later that afternoon, the stunt team confronted another challenge. A key sequence required our hero to vault across 3 crumbling pillars set against a sheer drop to the crashing surf below. The pillars had been constructed of lightweight foam, coated to resemble aged stone, but when the lead stunt double launched himself, the 3rd pillar buckled, sending foam fragments raining like confetti. In the split second of chaos, cameras rolled, capturing an unplanned tumble that left the double sprawled on the sand, clutching his knee. Rather than calling cut immediately, the stunt coordinator, Marco, barked, "Show us your pain." And the double, grit flashing in his eyes, writhed convincingly before scrambling to his feet as scripted. In the edit, that raw reaction became the emotional heart of the leap, a visceral reminder of a hero's vulnerability. Back on set, they rebuilt the pillars with reinforced cores, but no sequence ever surpassed the raw electricity of that first, broken take. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the quarry's sandstone buttresses, the sound crew attempted to record ambient echoes for the temple interiors. They set up microphones against the cavern walls, only to discover that every call of a gull overhead and distant rumble of an ATV on a hidden service road seeped into the recordings. Frustrated, the boom operator, Nadia, climbed to a narrow outcrop and whistled sharply, prompting a flock of gulls to wheel away in a flurry of wings. She captured the laughter of the crew as they watched, a rare moment of levity amid the long hours. Later in post-production, those unintended bird cries were woven into the final track, lending the temple a haunting loneliness that no Foley artist could have anticipated. By the time we reached the desert exteriors, temperatures had soared above what any of us had experienced on previous shoots. The DOP, our director of photography, had rigged dozens of softboxes to tame the unrelenting sun, but even under shade cloth, the heat radiated off the sand like a furnace. During one particularly grueling take, the actress playing Io, no stranger to long days, collapsed on her knees after delivering her final line. We all sprang into action, fetching water and fanning her with production call sheets until she recovered. Instead of calling it a day, the director chose to film her moment of genuine exhaustion, weaving it seamlessly into a scene showing her character's sacrifice. In that small act of compassion, the line between performer and role blurred, reminding us that every tear on camera carried the salt of honest exertion. Camaraderie among cast and crew often sprouted in the unlikeliest moments. On breaks from the relentless shots in the black lava fields, the makeup artists set up an impromptu tattoo parlor, doodling temporary designs, Greek letters, lightning bolts, tiny laurel wreaths on willing extras' arms. One gaffer ended up with a tiny Pegasus prancing across his bicep, which he insisted on wearing through the rest of the shoot. When the cameras didn't catch it, the next scene began with the director spotting the watercolor Pegasus and ordering its inclusion as a fleeting emblem, a detail so brief it became something of a legend in blooper reels. Not all challenges were creative. Logistics often threatened to derail us. A crucial transport of props, a massive marble throne and a pair of life-sized marble statues, was delayed by customs at a small Mediterranean port. The port officials, perplexed by crates labeled mythic antiquities, held the shipment for 3 days, demanding documentation and bureaucratic tape. Meanwhile, the art director, Helena, fielded frantic calls, then orchestrated a ruse. She dispatched a team to deliver a decoy crate of hollow plaster replicas to the location, while the originals were still held. On the morning of the shoot, extras stood in the throne room as the decoys were installed. By lunchtime, the real marble arrived under a different paperwork label. The audience never saw a seam, but we all learned that even mythic relics sometimes need mortals' resourcefulness to reach their destiny. Amid these hardships, small joys kept morale alight. The catering team, led by Hassan, began customizing meals to match the world we were building. Spiced lamb skewers served on wooden platters, flatbreads baked in olive oil, soaked cast-iron pans, sweet wine pressed from local grapes. One twilight, he surprised everyone with a rooftop banquet atop the palace set, stringing lanterns between scaffolding and hosting a feast beneath the stars. It was an invitation to remember why we labored through late nights and sandstorms, to celebrate the community of storytellers. I can still taste the honeyed figs he brought from a nearby orchard and feel the warmth of laughter that rose above the clatter of cameras. Some of the most surprising moments emerged from the actors themselves. During a scene depicting the hero's confrontation with the Cyclops, the lead actor insisted on improvising an ode to courage in broken ancient Greek. The production translator scrambled to scribble down his words, and the director nodded approvingly when the actor's earnest cadence rang out across the set. In the edit, that improvised speech became the centerpiece of the battle, lending authenticity no writer could have scripted. The technical crew, too, found moments of levity. Lighting technicians engineered a device to simulate storm clouds by projecting ripple-patterned gobos through thick smoke, but one night, the smoke machine misfired, filling the entire valley set with choking fog. When the director called cut, the entire crew erupted in sneezing fits, sleeves pressed to faces. Rather than waste the footage, the DOP suggested leaning into the accident, alchemizing the unintended fog into a scene where mortals despair under the weight of pending doom. The resulting sequence, bathed in layers of mist, became one of the film's most atmospheric interludes. Behind the cameras, unseen heroes labored quietly. The script supervisor tracked continuity with obsessive precision, noting that a strand of the hero's hair fell differently between takes. She constructed a cheat sheet diagram of hair placements, costumes, and prop positions, a labyrinthine chart that looked more like an astrological map than a film document. When the editor later melded disparate takes, those notes ensured that scars, chain links, and even the hero's sweat marks matched from frame to frame. Her meticulous care shaped the seamless illusion of time and place. By the time we reached the final days of shooting, the epic storm at sea, and the climactic descent into the underworld, exhaustion had settled over the crew like a tide. Extras slept in makeup chairs. Grips wrapped their minds around complex camera rigs before dawn. Yet even then, small gestures sustained us. The art boy carrying extra umbrellas, the sound mixer offering ear-sparing advice, the assistant director who learned every member's name and greeted them with genuine warmth. When the final wrap was called, the director motioned for a spontaneous group shot, cast, crew, caterers, drivers, local guides, standing amid battered sets and scattered cables, faces streaked with paint, dust, and sweat. In that single frame, I saw everything the film had become, a tapestry woven from every challenge, every kindness, every moment of shared crisis and laughter. In the months since, I've watched the finished film countless times, marveling at how those behind-the-scenes stories found their way into the final cut. The torn tunics, the raw stunt tumble, the accidental bird cries, the improvised oath, all became threads in the epic's grand weave. I think of the countless hands, Valentina's and Marco's, Valentina's and Nadia's, Hassan's and Helena's, that shaped each frame, and I realize that the real magic of production lies in the unpredictable alchemy of human endeavor. For every scripted beat, there were a dozen unscripted sparks of creativity and compassion. And it is in those sparks, in the laughter amid chaos, the solidarity in the face of setbacks, the small triumphs born of shared struggle, that the true heart of the story flickers to life, reminding us that making myth demands not only imagination, but the unbreakable bonds of those who dare to dream together. Every setting became a living character. The dunes' golden hush and gulls' cries, the quarry's echo-laden halls, the marketplace's mosaic of light and shadow, the forest's cathedral of twisting limbs, the underworld's pallid silence, and Olympus's high-contrast radiance. In each place, cinematography and sound design intertwined, HUDs of flame and mist, low-frequency roars and spectral choir, booming edits and quiet long takes, binding us to the world's emotional tides. Above all, we discovered that filmmaking is heartwork as much as craft. From grips who saved tumbling stone to tailors who stitched ragged hems into legends, from stunt doubles who transformed real pain into genuine vulnerability to caterers whose spiced feasts became communal ritual, every frame bears the imprint of human devotion. It is in those unseen hands that myth finds its breath, in those passing smiles that theaters lighten the darkest scenes, and in those shared moments of wonder that epics become ours. If these tales of mythic struggle and mortal courage stirred something in you, an echo of dreams you carry, questions of fate you wrestle, or the simple joy of cinematic wonder, then you belong here with us at Frame Shift. Subscribe and join our gatherings beneath silver screens and whispered oak boughs, where stories unfold like starlight across the night. Together, we'll dive deeper into the heart of film, unravel its hidden currents, and kindle the spark of insight that turns every viewing into a new journey. Until then, may your footsteps carry you ever onward between shadow and dawn, where legends await those who dare to see beyond the veil.